colors of spring are like a warm and welcome smile. Here in the Rocky Mountains, it's also a season when the snows of the winter begin to melt, and the fresh, crisp days are sometimes tinged with uncertainty. For Chet Ritchie, these mountains are home now. He's found that working as a cowboy, even when you're half owner of the place, is a harsh, rugged way to earn your keep. But there are rewards, too. Chet and his partner have carved themselves a place here. It's a place where men seem to live at peace with nature. Yet nature is not always what it seems. Before the day is over, this valley will be threatened by an awesome natural disaster. While Chet is down below with the horses, his partner, Hank Boyd, is working the upper ridges. Chet and Hank had met while serving together in the National Guard back east. Both had shared a dream of ranching, yet neither really expected it to come true. They only made it possible by taking on the challenge of ranching high in these mountains, where the terrain makes everything 10 times as hard. Today, Hank finds his thoughts drifting away from the work at hand. Back to the winter just past. It was a long, rugged winter, and the snow fell on the mountaintops in what seemed like a never-ending shower. Beautiful, but a bad omen comes spring, when the melting of this unusually heavy snow blanket would spell danger for the people along the mountainsides and in the valleys. The danger of floods. What took months to fall will melt and flow down the slopes and into the valleys in a much shorter time. Satellites launched by NASA and operated by the National Weather Service take photographs to keep an eye on the developing situation below. The pictures now show another rainstorm forming in the mountains that could unleash torrents of water, adding to the already heavy runoff. The forecasters, armed with this information, have given their warnings. Hank has heard the warnings and knows all too well its meaning. Off in the distance, the storm sends word of its arrival, echoing through the valley. Men who live close to nature learn to read its signs. A tiny stream, hardly big enough to notice, but it should be dry. It stays dry all year round. To Hank, the message is clear. The flood has started. All the lands below are in imminent danger. He must ride into that danger to bring warning to Chet. Hank does not want to go through another flood. He has seen one before and recalls it now too vividly. and the other members of the National Guard didn't mind the long, aching hours. But there was always the fear, the frustration of knowing that at any moment, one surge of water might carry away the work of days. It was a time deeply imprinted in Hank's memory. Thousands of dedicated people doing so much, working against the thought of how many might die if the waters could not be held back. But in their efforts, they were not alone. Overhead, satellites kept a vigil, relaying vital information to disaster officials, giving them a broad-scale look at the entire region, letting them see what areas were hardest hit and where emergency aid was most needed. In recent years, scientists have been hard at work on new ways to use the incredible versatility of satellites for helping to predict floods and planning how to prevent them. A satellite photo, manipulated with artificial colors, can show with amazing clarity many details, such as the extent of snow cover, how much snow there is, how fast it is melting. These are vital clues for predicting a flood. Knowing whether this and other conditions will lead to the danger of floods is of vital interest to scientists. Instruments installed at key locations can measure the amount of moisture in the soil, and they can measure the amount of rainfall, adding to the problem of the melting snow. This data can be gathered from many instruments at remote locations and relayed by satellite. Weathermen also need to know how high the river is and how fast it's flowing. Again, satellites can provide the answers. In moments, a radio signal carries the data from the instruments to satellites and back to receiving stations on the ground. Still, the water kept coming, rising closer to the very brink of disaster. Riding down into the valley to give warning, Hank remembers only too well the events that followed. The helplessness of being unable to cope with the incredible force of a river gone wild. Powerful enough to tear apart an upstream dam. And then, all hell broke loose. Fortunately for the people in the area, satellites were able to provide information that pinpointed the exact times and places where the flood would be most dangerous. Civil preparedness officials were then able to send out the life-saving message to evacuate. And when the flood waters finally receded, the reports started coming in. There were no fatalities, but the property damage was devastating.
Well, Friday morning we were awoken about 5 o'clock in the morning and told to evacuate. Then we had about 2-3 hours to get out. So we just took a suitcase with the clothes for the children.
And within 5 minutes we were out of the house. My wife, my child, 2 years old, my son, myself.
Got in one of our cars and drove off to a motel where we thought we'd spend the day listening to the newscast, fully expecting to spend that night sleeping in our own beds. And we learned later on that the height of water in this area reached in my home, I estimate, a height of 18 feet, totally covering the house, all except perhaps 2 or 3 feet of the attic.
We prepared to die because we knew this was it. Debris hit the house. We heard it. We thought the foundation was giving. And we explained to the boys how it was to drown. And we prayed. That's all we did. We had a Bible up there with us. And we feel like this is what brought us through. We just prayed and asked the Lord to protect us if it was His will, and I believe He did.
36 hours after the initial warning, we first started to realize what had happened to us. Perhaps a trauma set in. And we, like a lot of other people, started to wonder, what do you do next? We literally, at that point, owned exactly what we were wearing.
Listen, you kind of took a beating, didn't you?
We certainly did.
Did you lose everything in the house?
Everything from top to bottom. Just a little of our roof was sticking out.
I like the neighborhood. I like the people that I live around, but once is an experience.
We need help now. I mean, it isn't a little creek that overflowed. It's a whole valley that's destroyed.
We don't want to give it up, but you can only do so much. And where do we go from here?
You need a little bit of help.
We need a lot of help.
Others in the work crew had clambered to safety when the earth gave way under them. But Hank, out in front of the rest, had been snatched up by the river gone wild. After working so long for the safety of the community, now suddenly his own life was in peril. Today, a very real nightmare situation exists for Hank Boyd. The outcome, very much in doubt. One day, perhaps satellite data and other research will show the way to free us from the danger of floods. Till then, the satellites of NASA will keep a watch on the flood below.